Today, we are on ETF Watch. We should get a confirmation while we are live, ladies and gentlemen, and are moments away from what marks the biggest turning point in Bitcoin's history thus far. 15 years old to the day. The strangest thing is BlackRock is not yet listed on the approval list. It looks like $500 million has flown into Coinbase, and Fidelity is listing the tickers. Joining us today on such a monumental day is Seb Bunney, author of The Hidden Cost of Money and co-author of Beers for Bitcoin, elite mountain bike instructor and avid skier. Before I do bring Seb on, I've just got this video here of Jamie Dimon. Just a quick reminder of what we've been playing up against for so long, ladies and gentlemen. Live, also sharing audio. All right, let's start again. This is what we're going up against, ladies and gentlemen, and then we'll bring Seb up.
There's also new regulation coming on Bitcoin, and you famously said recently that you would shut it down if you were in government. Can you give us more clarity on that?
What I've always said is that Bitcoin doesn't have value, and I don't care what people do with Bitcoin, but what I was also pointing out is that the actual use cases are sex trafficking, tax avoidance, anti-money laundering, terrorism financing. It's not people just buying and selling Bitcoin. There's no value to if you're buying and selling Bitcoin.
It's been a rough year.
So that's not going to stop. That's the propaganda that we're up against. Seb, this has been a long time in the making. The ETF and stuff, we'll dive into your story. Absolutely fascinating. But what do you think's going on here with Jamie Dimon, and what are your thoughts about this Bitcoin ETF that's going to happen probably within the next half an hour, 45 minutes?
Oh man, honestly, it's such a pleasure to have me on. I truly, truly appreciate it, Sean. But the ETF is wild to see. You know what? There's a quote that comes to mind, which is Ross Stevens from Stone Ridge Asset Management. And he says, Bitcoin is a system built on rules instead of rulers. And I think that a lot of these individuals are rulers, whether it's Gary Gensler or whether it's Jamie Dimon. And I think a lot of them are fearful. They realize that they're being threatened, and they're trying to protect themselves and trying to put up a bit of a smokescreen.
So what happens then with the ETF if it captures such a large portion of the available supply of Bitcoin? There's very little left on the supply. Is that going to affect people that are self-sovereign individuals now that have been doing the right thing, that have been stacking sats, putting in cold storage?
So it's interesting when you go back to just the principles of economics. When you've got a limited supply and then you've got increased demand, what ends up happening is price is only one way for it to go, and that is to go up. And so this obviously, I see it as a huge benefit to any self-sovereign individuals because their purchasing power increases. But even in the long run, and I think we were just talking about this briefly, Sean, before this, which is I think in the short term, we're going to see a lot of Bitcoin potentially become centralized in these ETFs. But I think in the long term, people are going to start questioning, wait, why does this thing continue to go up and up and up? And with that questioning, they're going to start digging into the monetary system, and they're going to start realizing some of the faults, some of the issues that we currently face. So I think in the long term, it's long-term beneficial because people will start questioning the system and then hopefully transition to Bitcoin, the sovereignty instrument, as opposed to Bitcoin, the financial instrument that the ETFs are and whatnot. But in the long term, I think it's beneficial. Short term, maybe not.
Yeah, awesome. I've just got a couple of comments that your audio is a little bit quiet. I don't know if you can be closer to the microphone. Otherwise, I've turned your audio up
How's that? Is that a little better?
Yeah, then maybe I'll turn it down a little bit. Let us know in the chat, ladies and gentlemen. Is that better with Seb? I hear fine, turn it up. That sounds good. So it's taken 100 years for us to get here to this place where inflation has absolutely gone rampant. We can see Bitcoin's pretty much the only hedge against inflation that we have had. You wrote a whole book about it, The Hidden Cost of Money. I'm up to chapter 5 of it, which is absolutely incredible. One thing I noticed is not one single mention as of yet about Bitcoin. 5 chapters into a book, I believe it's 12 chapters long, maybe a little bit longer. Not once has the word Bitcoin come up.
It's, you know what? I took a page out of Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow, where I realized there is such an aversion to Bitcoin in society. The moment you bring up Bitcoin, people are just like, it's a Ponzi, I don't want to talk about it, and they shut off. And so what I've really recognized that when I try to orange pill people, they've got to understand the problem first before they can start to recognize the solution. And so this book, I really try to lay out that many of the issues that we face in society, whether it is whether it is our environmental destruction because money is worth less over time, we're incentivized to consume, whether it is the politicians being able to do whatever it is they want because they've got a money printer in their back room, whether it is businesses being fiscally irresponsible from bailouts, like you name it. I think a lot of the issues that we face stem from a broken monetary system. And so I believe that money weaves its influence acutely throughout society, but people need to recognize this before you can start to be able to put up a solution. And so this is where, until someone understands this, I try not to talk about Bitcoin because many times they're going to put up that barrier which impedes their ability to actually look at Bitcoin objectively.
Yep. And is the ETF Bitcoin still going to fix the problem, or is it only self-sovereign Bitcoin that's going to fix this problem that's been going on? Say long term, like short term, they get price exposure. That's all good, but price exposure is not actual Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think when you look at the utilities of, the utility value of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer system. It allows us to transact without intermediaries, so we don't have to rely on trust. We don't have to rely on permission to be able to use our money. And that is one of the primary benefits of Bitcoin. Not only that, but I think when it comes to Bitcoin, I want to be able to have a savings vehicle that if the government decides to devalue the currency, then I'm sure that the supply is not going to be inflated. The problem with the ETFs is, first off, yes, you may be benefiting from some of the economic benefits if Bitcoin goes up, but you don't get any of those peer-to-peer benefits. You don't get the trustlessness. You don't get the permissionlessness. Not only that, we don't actually know how these ETFs are going to function in the long term, whether or not they're going to fractionalize Bitcoin, whether it's going to suppress the price of Bitcoin. So I'm nervous about how these ETFs are going to impact Bitcoin, especially in the short to midterm. But for anyone who is kind of new to Bitcoin, the ETFs are not Bitcoin. They're just a derivative that's benefiting from the price action of Bitcoin.
Yep. One of the things, and it looks like people are saying approved, a little bit skeptical and stuff there, but one of the things in your book that I had a big takeaway was you're talking about the psychology of money, and I think that's what your book really focuses on. But you relate it back to your childhood, growing up with two brothers, a single mother, and how hard inflation, I guess, has changed the way that the family unit now interacts. And then you also related it back to climate change. How would you explain the psychology shift of going from a fiat standard to a Bitcoin standard? What's that trajectory been?
I would say, like, it's really important to be able to understand how money influences us. It's really important to understand how money influences our behavior first. And so in the book, I talk about kind of like three main aspects of our behavior which are altered by money. Now, if you're already deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you're probably going to have heard of this thing called time preference. So this is the first one. Now, our time preference is, do we have a high time preference where we're simply trying to meet immediate needs, where we're simply being impulsive, and you'll notice that our current environment very much incentivizes this because our money is worth less over time. Its purchasing power is greatest in the present moment. We're incentivized to spend in the present moment and consume in the present moment, but also extract whatever we can from society. The inverse is true on something like Bitcoin. You have a low time preference. That means that you're looking to the long term, you're looking to build security, you're looking to build prosperity. And the reason why that happens is because when you have a fixed supply of currency and you have a society that technology is constantly advancing, productivity is constantly increasing, well, if you've got a fixed supply as productivity is increasing, technology is advancing, then prices over time should fall. So if prices are falling, then your purchasing power is not declining, but it's actually increasing. So this inverts it. We're now incentivized, given that our purchasing power is greater in the future, we're incentivized to save, we're incentivized to think long term. And this is profound. This is hugely beneficial in so many areas of life when we start thinking long term. And the next one is you can dive into compassion and altruism. When we think about psychology, there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's kind of 5 tiers. And that base tier is security, whether that is shelter, whether that is food. And then above that, you've got, say, relationships, you've got kind of pursuit of passions, you've got self-actualization. But you'll notice that in order to be able to move up the pyramid, you have to meet those base level needs. So if you're not getting shelter and you're not getting food, it's very hard to now put yourself out there to try and give back to society and be compassionate and altruistic. And so what we notice is that when money is losing value over time, when the cost of living is rising, when house prices are going through the roof, all of a sudden, we are now being threatened. Our security, our safety is being threatened. And we know that when we're being threatened, our aperture of awareness starts to narrow. We start to focus on, I just need to be able to meet these immediate needs. And so it limits our ability to give back. And then the final one, which I like to quickly talk about, is just meaninglessness and apathy. In our current monetary system, are we incentivized to try and strive to get ahead? Are we incentivized to try and save for a house when house prices are massively outstripping the growth of our wages? Are we incentivized to try and get ahead when our cost of living is becoming so expensive that we can't afford the food that we want to be able to eat? We're constantly kind of having to regress. And so in psychology, there's this other one term that I'll quickly touch on, which is called our locus of control. And that is, we either have an external or an internal, and it's kind of a spectrum between those two. An internal locus of control basically means that I believe that I can control the world around me. I believe that I have control over my path and my destiny. And people with an internal locus of control tend to have much higher confidence. They have much better health outcomes. They have lower rates of obesity, depression, you name it. There's tons of studies on this. And then the inverse is an external locus of control. That is that you don't believe that you have controls you and basically governs your path. And with our current monetary environment, where the cost of living is outstripping our growth in wages, when cost of living is basically just becoming unaffordable for the average person, all of a sudden you start realizing that people are just they're giving in. They feel as if they have no control over the path of their life. And there's many studies, again, that look at this and they start realizing you've got much lower rates of confidence, or much lower rates of obesity, higher rates of obesity, high rates of depression, anxiety, less confidence, way worse health outcomes. And so you're starting to notice how money is shaping who we are and how we show up in this world. And that's really important to understand.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I just want to say just quickly to everyone's saying the ETF's confirmed it's go time. There's nothing from Jeff. There's nothing from Eric Bellahanis. There's nothing from the SEC. There's nothing from Gary Gensler yet. So let's wait for the Bloomberg guys to confirm. We saw yesterday it wasn't real. So if anyone can confirm properly. One of the biggest takeaways there is when we are learning about money and it starts to change our time preference, the world gets better. Bitcoin fixes this. But do you ever see Bitcoin becoming the world reserve currency? Or is it just going to be a store of value and it's just another option to gold? Or are we going to start seeing fiat dollars being backed by gold around the world? Like, I know it's legal tender in certain places, but it's still, until we can fully go on a Bitcoin standard, we're always going to have wars and stuff. I understand that, but there will be less wars and stuff. Do you see this as maybe a first step to be able to get there? People get into the Bitcoin ETF, they learn about self-sovereign, and then that starts to put pressure on nation states to adopt Bitcoin as a reserve asset. Like later down the track, I'm talking 10, 20, 30 years. And because people have then changed their time preference, they start to understand what being self-sovereign is. They are incentivized to be able to save. They have a technology that allows them to save. Will it start from the bottom up and force nation states onto it, or that's just a pipe dream from Bitcoiners?
So I think first touching on the gold, because you talked about gold, I find it unlikely that we're going to transition back to a pure gold standard like we've had in the past. And the reason why I say that is because gold being physical in nature, this is a problem. It means that when you start accumulating gold, at some point you have to rely on a centralized entity to store that gold. If you have a currency that's backed by gold, well, we're not going to be exchanging gold coins. We're going to be digital, given that we live in a digital world, which means we have to trust some form of centralized entity to hold that gold. And that's when things can become corrupted. And we know, if you actually dig into the central bank's balance sheets, we know that they've actually never been audited. Central banks have never been audited. We have to trust what they have to say. This is insane. And what you also start to realize is that when they report gold on their balance sheet, they only report, or they can report their physical holdings, but included in their physical holdings is IOUs. So if you're a gold miner and you've got a big prospect of land and you think there's 1 ton of gold, what you can actually go do is you can borrow 1 ton of gold from the central bank and sell it into the market. Now you've obtained your capital up front to be able to mine that patch of land, but the central bank is still claiming that they have that gold on their balance sheet. So now that you've doubled the supply of gold, you've got gold entering the market, but then the central bank says they've got gold. So ultimately, that actually suppresses the price of gold in the long term. And so I don't think we're going to transition back to a gold standard. That's not to say that I don't think there's going to be central banks holding gold for long periods of time. I think that Bitcoin, in an ideal world, the way that I envision it, is that if Bitcoin is a world reserve asset rather than a world reserve currency, then people can choose to move to it to store value. Now, what that also means is that I believe in a free market. So if a nation state wants to create a currency, there's nothing stopping a nation state from creating currency. But if its populace know that they can move back to this asset, then all of a sudden that means the nation state has to create some form of value through this currency. The currency actually has to offer value to society. At the moment, it is not true. When it comes to fiat currencies, because we have legal tender laws and those nations have to, or the users of that nation, the occupants of that nation have to use that currency, they're forced onto this currency and their purchasing power is slowly debased over time. And so the government effectively gets to take that purchasing power and spend it how it sees fit. If you have a world reserve asset like Bitcoin, a nation can run a fiat currency if they want to. There's nothing stopping a nation from doing that, but they're disincentivized to do anything that is disadvantageous to the populace. And so what I think is phenomenal about Bitcoin is because it's decentralized, it's permissionless, and it's trustless. All of a sudden, you're realigning the incentives in society. You're actually realigning the incentives towards collaboration, towards kind of working together, towards actually trying to provide value in society, because there's no other way to obtain value other than offering value, or there's no other way to obtain capital other than offering value, which is not true in our current system. You can steal it through debasement.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. Say this does happen. What sort of time frame do you think? Like Bitcoin's been around for 15 years. For people on a Bitcoin standard for the last 15 years, it's surely changed their life. Even for me, since 2019, it's done that. But we live in such a huge world, 9+ billion people. How's this shift happen? Like over what time frame are we sort of? I know it's all speculation, but you know, is it going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, another 15, or are we looking 50, 100 years out?
It's, you know what, there's, what's his name? Maynard Keynes, the famous inventor of Keynesian economics. He once said, the market can stay rational for longer than you can stay solvent. And I think the thing that's really challenging is it's really hard to pinpoint when this may happen. And if you ever read Ray Dalio's books, The Big Debt Crisis and the Changing World Orders, you start to realize that it's very predictable that any world reserve currency is always going to fall. There is something called the Triffin paradox. For those that are unfamiliar, it basically means that if you become a world reserve currency, you've got to ensure that globally, all of the current countries around you that you trade with have access to dollars or access to your currency. So what do? You start destroying your manufacturing base and you become an importer. You start purchasing goods from overseas, and that moves your currency externally, globally. But the problem is, you came into power because of the value created, and all of a sudden you've now destroyed it by destroying your manufacturing base, destroying the value at which you add. So the Triffin paradox is that any country that becomes a world reserve currency ends up basically destroying itself from the inside out. And so we've seen throughout history, whether we're looking at the Dutch guilder or the British pound or the Chinese yuan way back and when, like you start to realize that these currencies that have been world reserve currencies have a finite lifespan. It's usually, I think if I remember correctly from his book, it's about 75 to 150 years. And we're coming to the end of the US dollar as the world reserve asset. And we're seeing a lot of the symptoms of a currency breaking down. The challenge is, when will that happen? And there's that famous thing, which is, gradually then suddenly. It could, because of the fragility in the system. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next 2 to 3 years, we saw a total breakdown of the US dollar and we went into a major inflationary environment because of how much debt we have. But at the same time, it also wouldn't surprise me if we limp on for another 10, 15 years. It's a tough one.
Yep. One of the things that the Fed does, I want to bring up, it looks like Eric Bellahanis is confirming the ETF has been approved. So give us a couple of minutes just to see if anything populates. I made the mistake yesterday of going live as soon as we got that SEC announcement yesterday. I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, well done, pat on the back, absolutely insane. And then it happened. So just give us a couple of minutes to do that. Say it does happen, like what happens during C19 is the Federal Reserve asked BlackRock to buy a whole lot of bonds, was it? Can they not this time? Because we're going to continue to inflate, they're going to continue to print money, and they need somebody to be able to buy that money to be able to lend it out so they can keep their Ponzi scheme going. Could we see this time that they actually get them to buy Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin to be able to accelerate it? Because it is now the hardest asset that's ever existed. It'd probably make the most amounts of sense for them to be putting that inflating fiat into a hard asset to be able to perpetuate the Cantillon effect, I guess.
Oh, totally. I think that it wouldn't surprise me. We already know that certain countries throughout the world are already purchasing Bitcoin, whether that's El Salvador holding it on their balance sheet, or whether as a Bhutan, I believe, held quite a bit. And then obviously they lost quite a bit with the FTX debacle. So I think there's a lot of nations that are already adopting Bitcoin on the balance sheet to hopefully prop up their currency. The challenge with the US is it's kind of they're in this predicament, which is Bitcoin competes with the US dollar. And so I think that it'll be interesting to see how the next few years pan out, because I also know that we've got the election year this year, and there's a lot of individuals who are running, whether it's RFK or I can never pronounce his name. Yeah, like are pro Bitcoin, and even RFK has said if he was to be in power, he would buy Bitcoin and put it on the central bank's balance sheet. So it will be interesting to see. I think that ultimately the game theory of Bitcoin is that if you've got this asset that is finite in supply and you've just got continued adoption, increased demand, and price just continues to rise, at some point they're going to be incentivized they already are incentivized to jump on board, because it actually props up the US dollar. But ultimately they've got so much debt, I think the US dollar is going to fail at some point. They just continue to intervene.
Yep. Yeah, I thought it was like 120 years on average, and we've far exceeded that. But I guess it only became fiat currency since like the 70s as well. So maybe they have a little bit more runway as well. I know inflation's shot up a whole lot since then. Sorry to keep bringing up the ETF, but I just want to show a couple of things for people. It looks pretty much like everything has been confirmed. It looks like the SEC website might be down as well. So just quickly, this is Eric Bellahanis. Obviously, we can't trust SEC, Gary Gensler anymore because they can't do 2FA, which is absolutely insane. Eric, order grant and accelerated approval. It's over. Thank God. The SEC, Jan 10th, 2024, self-regulatory organization, NYSE, ARCA Inc., NASDAQ, CBO Exchange, order granting accelerated approval, proposed rule changes modified by amendments thereto to list and trade Bitcoin-based, commodity-based trust shares and trust units. It's as close as we're going to get until, let me share this tab as well, till we get 100% confirmation. How are we going to get confirmation now? Like anything that goes up on the SEC site. Yesterday, they just lost 100% credibility. And I guess that's what we're seeing also with the fiat dollars as well. Once you're watching and you're aware and you're awake, and then you see the incompetence of these people, and maybe it's not actually incompetence, it's just that it's a broken money system. These people are just doing their jobs and mistakes happen. But when these mistakes happen, yesterday it wiped out billions of dollars of leverage, and people shouldn't be trading on leverage, I guess. Somebody's always going to get wrecked in that case. But how are we going to start to trust these credible people like mainstream news? I haven't watched that for 10, 15 years. It's so amazing. The fiat standard is just keeps everyone confused, I guess.
Oh man, I saw a post this morning by Samson Mao, and he was asking this exact question. He's like, how do we know when the second approval of Bitcoin is going through? And someone had commented, Gary Gensler just needs to post a picture of himself holding his driver's license and a piece of paper saying approved. And so I think that's the way we can trust him.
Yeah, but even if he was to go live, but nobody knows what Gary Gensler's license number is either. Like with deep fakes, AI, they could jump onto the Gary Gensler's Twitter account, they could jump onto the SEC account, and they could have a video of him standing there and stuff. But AI has gotten pretty good, and I'm sure there's enough people. They probably would have done it yesterday over today, but say that happens, we're moving into this world where, like, I think Bitcoin's probably the solution to this as well. If people need to pay these AI models or whatever and bits of Bitcoin, it's probably not going to stop it for someone like the SEC or to be able to get out a big fair propaganda campaign. They're willing to spend the Bitcoin, but for the amounts that's coming on, do you think Bitcoin fixes that as well? Is that a possibility?
So it's interesting. And I'll use like Nostr as an example. I think when we have our own public and private key, what is phenomenal is that we're able to verify the authenticity of any transaction. And that's the same with if we are speaking publicly and we have a public-private key and we've signed a transaction or broadcasting ourselves publicly, we're able to verify that authenticity. And I think that as we move forward, we're going to see this increasing. We really see it with Nostr. People are able to have a public and private key to access social media. And that also impedes censorship to some extent as well when you've got a decentralized social media network. The thing that's really challenging is that I think we need to improve and very much educate people about the importance of securing your account, securing passwords, two-factor authentication, you name it, because ultimately, if you do have a public and private key for your identity, if someone accesses that, they also can commit identity fraud, you name it. And so I think that ultimately we've just got to improve 2FA and understanding encryption and whatnot and ensuring passwords rather than having my password 1234.
Or the nuclear code, I think 6 zeros for many years. I think that may have been a meme as well, the launch code. But does that not allow governments to be able to come in? I think people like Nikki Haley and stuff and the World Economic Forum saying digital IDs 2025, 2030 or whatever, because we do get so many bots and stuff. Is that not another attack vector? Like, how can Bitcoiners, or how can we implement this in a decentralized way on a global scale? Because it has to be on a global scale. And if it is on a global scale, then we're just going to get the WEF come straight in. And I don't know, like the Bitcoin community is strong and stuff. I just don't think they're big enough to be able to take on the global superpowers at the moment to be able to have this total freedom. I think we've got this tiny little window left. You know, they're even capturing through this ETF proper Bitcoin, and that will probably never come back onto the market.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's really challenging because I think that identity is incredibly important. And up until AI and up until the technological advancements to the points at which we can replicate someone digitally, we've been able to verify someone's identity physically. And so we've not necessarily, digital identity has not necessarily been needed, but now it is very much needed. And this is where I'm hoping that we're going to see more advancements in digital identity, whether it's attached to Bitcoin, whether it's attached to any other form of distributed means, which means there's no central entity that's controlling it. I have seen, and actually I was just talking to a friend recently on Bitcoin, I think there's something called ION, I-O-N, and it's looking at being able to attach a digital identity to Bitcoin. And I think that as Bitcoin hopefully starts to commandeer more of the world's wealth, Bitcoin's purchasing power is going to grow. So Bitcoin is going to become more influential. And if Bitcoin is holding that ethos of free market competition, decentralized nature, I'm hoping that they're able to start pushing back against some of these measures. The challenging thing right now is Bitcoin is like a $700-800 billion asset in comparison to the majority of other assets, $1 quadrillion in derivatives, 300 trillion in real estate, equities, 150 trillion, bonds, 300 trillion. So it's really challenging to compete given that we're such a minority. But I think that we have a core group that is passionate about self-sovereignty. We have a core group that's passionate about distributing trust. And because of that core group, hopefully we can come together and create change.
I hope so. And like the Bitcoin community is probably the most vocal, strongest community. And I guess there's an incentive to become self-sovereign because I guess there's all the cypherpunks and stuff, and they all got together around code and they wanted to make digital decentralized money, and it never really came to be. But now that we've got the world's hardest asset and it is decentralized, when you start to understand the ethos of being self-sovereign and stuff, it gives you an incentive, I guess, to be able to get there. And that's what gives us these, like, shout out to all the Bitcoiners out there who've been stacking sats. You're all absolute maniacs. And it's been incredible to be on this journey with everyone. And we can come in from all different areas. If you're on the left, if you're on the right, if you're on the middle, if you don't care, whatever it is. But when people truly understand, then they start to get to a place where they're like, okay, we can actually change the world. Bitcoin fixes this. I just don't know, and I hope to believe, and I think for the individual person on a Bitcoin stand, it truly changes their life. But I'd love to say, I just don't think we're at that inflection point where we have enough people, but maybe this BlackRock ETF is a gateway drug. I want to talk about Looking Glass Education, actually, and Beers for Bitcoin. It's one of the books that I've given out the most, but it does look like, ladies and gentlemen, that it is not confirmed. I will show you this. So here's Sam Callahan from Swan putting this out. There it is, all 11 spot Bitcoin ETFs approved. So he lists the sources, SEC website, and then when I share this tab, oops, page error, not found. So I don't know if so many people are going on there trying to check it and it's crashed their website, or they've totally redacted it. So until we get 100% confirmation, it's not done until it's done. But as we go through this conversation, we will keep you up to date with it. I'll just see if there's anything from one thing that I haven't seen is BlackRock being listed on there as of yet. Necessary approval type list. If
that would be the best rug pull if the SEC releases all the ETFs and then doesn't. Yeah, that'd be unreal.
Wouldn't it be crazy? So, Frank, I'm happy to confirm the Grayscale team has received necessary regulatory approvals to uplist GBTC to their New York Stock Exchange ARCA, and we will share a press release with additional information shortly. Grayscale spokesperson we will keep you up to date, but ladies and gentlemen, the price is moving a little bit. Nothing spectacular yet. It's because the market is getting these conflicting messages. So more than you say, it's on the SEC's page, but when we go onto the SEC's page, it's just not found. No thanks. Let's error. So we'll see. If anyone else has got another link, tag me on Twitter at Sean Clark 911, SeanClarke 911. If you've got the link to the SEC's website that actually works, and if we vibe, hit subscribe. Now, Seb, as well as writing a book and stuff, obviously to be able to write a book takes a lot of time and a lot of commitments, and you've written two of them. You co-authored Beers for Bitcoin with Seb Bunney, absolutely great book. This Hidden Cost of Money is absolutely fantastic. To be able to read a book, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to have to pay money, obviously, like it's pay to play, but you've got a whole website called Looking Glass Education where you put out some amazing free information. So while we are waiting for absolute confirmation, can you guide us through this? Why is created? It's an amazing resource. Also what coddle and stuff is, but dive a little bit into why you did this. This was created with Seb Bunney, Greg Foss as well. Most people in the space know Greg Foss, pretty heavy hitter. What's Looking Glass all about?
Oh, for sure. So I would say that when I entered the space, I really realized that you could read about the technical aspects through Antonopoulos. You could dive into the philosophical aspects through Breedlove, the corporate aspects through Michael Saylor. But I realized there was very little content that broke down Bitcoin, macroeconomics, and financial literacy for the average person. And so Looking Glass is our attempt at trying to make content accessible and understandable and removing a lot of the jargon. And so we do a mixture of whether it's long form courses, diving into macroeconomics so you can better understand our monetary environment, diving into Bitcoin specifically and how Bitcoin works, the founder, how to interact with Bitcoin, you name it. We even have some other courses written by other individuals like Bitcoin and spirituality and meditation. It's phenomenal. And then we also have a bunch of, if you're not into the courses or you don't have that much time to commit, we have a lot of deep dives as well. Or if you're a teacher, we also have courses for teachers to teach to their students. And so we're very much trying to provide free content for the average individual to understand the world at which we live in. And then you'd mentioned coddle. One of the biggest areas we realized when it comes to Bitcoin is so many individuals go down that rabbit hole and then they go and hold their Bitcoin on exchanges. But as we know, we've seen FTX, we've seen Celsius, we've seen Voyager, we've seen BlockFi. Like the list just goes on and on and on for companies that are mismanaging funds and they go under. And so coddle is basically, it's a play on obviously the English word of coddling, to coddle your kids. It's our overprotective approach to supporting people through their custody journey. And so if you just want to pure self-custody, we can support you in that. And it's just kind of a one-time fee. Alternatively, we also work with the Bitcoin Advisor, which is actually based down in your end of the country, and that is in Australia.
I've had both Pete and Andy on.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we
Incredible
also work
people.
with the Bitcoin advisor. And so we help with collaborative custody, which is kind of that hybrid between a pure self custody and a centralized custodian. And it's distributing that trust between different players. And to be honest, I tend to lean on, I believe that the next wave of Bitcoiners, given the risks that are also associated with self-custody and the loss of your own private keys, I think the next wave of Bitcoin is collaborative custody is a phenomenal option. And so I very much agree with the collaborative custody. And so if you guys, just one more little point, which is like, if anyone is listening and you guys want support with your custody, do not hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to jump on a free initial call and just discuss what options are available.
Yep. I have put your Twitter link below as well. So if anyone needs to get in contact with Seb, super easy. I'll put up Looking Glass Education as well and a link to your new book. Absolutely fascinating. I wish I had the opportunity to read through the whole book because I'm still waiting to get to the part about Bitcoin. But I think the journey where you're laying it out, and like I was saying, it's more on the psychology, like how did we get here, and the family unit. Like I grew up with a single mother, a sister as well, always working, and wasn't there really for my emotional development. I was grateful that she was so driven and I guess such a go-getter. She's like one of the first female electricians in New Zealand and a female pilot and stuff, which was, so she's sort of always outside what was considered normal. So she'd push me to be the best, which has ultimately led me in hindsight down the Bitcoin path and understand. It sort of sounds like you went on the same journey when you're mountain bike instructing. You saw the greatest people in the world, like the top athletic mountain bike coaches and stuff. They just weren't making ends meet. And you, through your childhood and stuff, you're pushed. Actually, do you want to dive into the story of the scooter with your dad? Like that's heartbreaking, man.
Yeah, so there's kind of three little stories, and one of those is the scooter one. And I'll start with the first one, which is, and you touched on it very briefly. What really helped me to start questioning the environment at which we live in is that when I'm looking back and like in hindsight on my childhood, I started to realize that I grew up with a single mum and two brothers, and we lived in a little 2-bedroom house. And so I would say my mum did her absolute best, but because she was trying to put a roof over our heads and food on the table, she struggled to maybe meet our emotional needs. And so I started to realize, whoa, when money is like kind of increasing our cost of living, when it's becoming more expensive to get by, our parents have to go and work more. If our parents are working more, then they're not able to spend to the extent to which they'd like with the time with their kids. And so it starts to impede kids' emotional development. And then the second event was when I was about 9 years old. We were in New Zealand at the time. I was born in the UK, raised in New Zealand. We're in New Zealand, and my dad was over for a little bit. And I'd gone into this toy store about 3 months before, and I'd seen this scooter, and I was just absolutely enamored by it. I freaking loved it. And so I was just like, okay, I'm gonna save up for this thing. I got to figure out how to save up. So I saved up for 3 months. I walked into this toy store with my dad and my two brothers, and as we're walking up to the till to go pay for it, my dad's like, I feel guilty that you're getting the scooter and your brothers aren't. So I'm gonna buy. You know what? I'm going to buy your brothers a scooter and you got to pay for yours. And I was devastated. I was like heartbroken. I was like 9 years old at the time. But
after all that hard work of saving every penny.
Totally. And what I realized is in economics, there's this thing called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect is those closest to the monetary spigot benefit disproportionately. And I really recognized that this was kind of like the Cantillon effect on a micro level. My brothers were much closer to my dad than I was, and so they benefited disproportionately. But what is interesting is as they've grown up, I'm much more free market, and whereas they're much more left-leaning interventionistic because they've had a handful of handouts throughout their life. And so you can start to see, again, money shaping our environment. And then the final one is, as you touched on, is I was a backcountry mountain bike instructor for over a decade. And I started mountain biking when I was about 9-10 years old. And I watched all of the big movies and saw all of the idols and just used to put them up on a pedestal. But when I started actually working in the industry, I started working alongside these people that I idolized. And I started to realize, I was like, man, these guys are struggling to get by. These people that are in all of the biggest movies, seeing millions of views, they can't afford rent. They're struggling. They've got credit card debt. And I realized that in order to get by in our current monetary paradigm, you really have to understand, one, what's going on, but you've also got to have a lot of luck. And I think we should have a system that thrives on hard work as opposed to luck. And so I tended to realize through these experiences that our monetary system is broken. And that really got me questioning. And I would say that led me on my path to Bitcoin eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, man. When I read it, I was like, "Oh, that's so sad." But I guess in hindsight, it's a pretty good lesson to learn, the Cantillon effect. But obviously, it's only through hindsight, and through the book, you talk a lot about psychology and stuff. Like, how'd you end up working through that? Was it just going on a monetary process and trying to be able to understand how to get ahead because you've seen all these things, and then you dove into the psychology yourself? Or were you already fascinated with that beforehand, and that led to the monetary journey that you've gone on? Or was it sort of lockstep?
I would say when I started teaching mountain biking, I started to realize how hard it was to get ahead. And I realized that actually, if I wanted to pursue a career that I actually enjoyed, I was not going to be able to do that just through a mountain biker's income. And so that started I started reading and investing books, real estate books. And so I'd say I started with real estate. And then from real estate, I started to recognize, actually, I'm pretty young. Like, it's awesome having long-term rental properties, but I also want some action. So I started getting into trading in the financial markets, trading options and futures. And I did that for about 8-9 years and loved it, absolutely loved it. But then I started to realize, I was like, I'm looking at this through the lens of a free market, but each time I enter certain positions, my positions are getting slammed. And I'm like, why are they getting slammed? Well, they're getting slammed because central banks continue to intervene. My free market positions have no defense against the central bank intervening and suppressing interest rates, raising interest rates, you name it. And so ultimately, I started to realize the system feels broken. The system feels like it's not working how it should do. And then that led me to gold and ultimately to Bitcoin. And what I feel like unbelievably lucky is that when I was trading in the financial markets, I was a big value investor, and I started listening to TIP, or the Investors Podcast, with Preston Pysh. And that was about, I would say, maybe 7 years ago or so. And then I saw this journey seeing Preston go from this value investor to down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin. And initially I thought it was a Ponzi, but then Preston, huge admiration for the value that he kind of adds to this space.
Absolutely amazing. Preston was one of the first people that I really started following as well back in the day. What I want to do is, a couple of people are sending me links. So first I want to go to James. James is really the only person that we can trust now in regards to there's breaking news with the ETF. So everybody's just blowing up the chat as well. If you've got any questions for Seb, let us know in the chat. But what I want to say is, can pretty much guarantee the SEC did not intend for anyone outside the SEC to get their hands on this document link yet. I confirm that I downloaded the document from the SEC.gov website, and it is an approval order. Assume the SEC will repost shortly. If anyone's got up to date, all 11 have been approved, started to trade. What about the ETF? So we'll jump on there and find that out. SEC order granted seller approval. It's over. Thank God. I'd still like to see it on the SEC website. This 404 page is not found here yet.
It's just insane. Like, this is now the second time that they've basically stumbled and had their documents leaked. Like, these guys are supposedly regulating society and supporting the consumer, and they can't even manage their own website. It's mind blowing.
On one of the most monumental days in Bitcoin's history, and probably SEC's history, this is probably going to be the biggest ETF launch of all time. And like you're saying, they're incompetent. It's this is the people that are regulating and controlling our financial lives. While I just search for a couple of things, and we'll see if we can really confirm it. What I'd like to see, ladies and gentlemen, is we've got it from James, is what I showed you before. That quote, Bitcoin ETFs likely approved by the SEC, but not 100% confirmed. I sent the PDF on Twitter, but I've got a couple of questions there for you. So I've got a question for Seb. Do you know what the ETF was that BlackRock, I think they just hadn't been added yet, Rory. If anyone's algos need to be rebooted, SEC absolute clowns. What are the coming things that you're excited for, I guess, in the space? Is now we've got the ETF, are we going to see the Bitcoin change, the network change? Does BlackRock, because they own so many Bitcoin mining companies and stuff? Do they try, and I understand you need a node and consensus on the nodes, but are they going to try change the block size and stuff, or is it going to stay as it is? Or are we going to get something like segregated witness was good, Taproot as well was good at the time. Both of those opened up things like Lightning, but then Taproot also brought the ordinals and the wizards in. Do you see Bitcoin staying as it is for now, or are they slowly going to try use their sway to be able to change the Bitcoin network? And just a side note, I guess it's more important now to run a node more than ever.
So it's interesting because I think for those that are not necessarily familiar with how Bitcoin works, if we are to get a fork, given that BlackRock may potentially hold, let's say in a year or two's time, a large portion of Bitcoin, if we were to get a fork, of course they're going to have a lot of economic sway, so they can push whatever changes to the Bitcoin core, to the Bitcoin main the Bitcoin main code. But the reality is that Bitcoin still doesn't work that way. If you were to get, let's say we saw with the block size wars, we saw the small blockers and the big blockers, and we saw a fork. Well, anyone can choose to go down any fork. And if you believe in the sovereignty benefits of Bitcoin, BlackRock can invest billions, trillions of dollars of capital into whatever changes they want. But I believe that the Bitcoin maxis, the people who are in Bitcoin for its sovereignty benefits, there's no way they're going to allow that capital to flood into, or their capital to flood into Bitcoin, BlackRock's version of Bitcoin. They're going to 100% maintain in the original ethos, the original values of Bitcoin. And so ultimately, I think what would then end up happening is we have a competition between a more centralized version of Bitcoin versus a more decentralized. And then you have the same competition that we see with BSV and Bitcoin. And in the long run, I believe that Bitcoin will ultimately, in its current form, will win out.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. It's just, however they came together, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was, and we've got Adam back at the start, Hal Finney, and all the cypherpunks that got together, they had just such insight and foresight to be able to create something that you really just can't mess with. It's, I don't know, the more you go down the rabbit hole, sometimes I pinch myself and like, over time as Bitcoin's developed, they've made it near perfect. Yes, it gets a little bit expensive, I understand that, but to be self-sovereign, that's sort of the only downside I see for some people. It's not 100%, like it's not cheap, but there are scaling solutions like Lightning. But aside from that, it's the greatest thing that's ever been invented for humanity. Even the Bitcoin mining, incentivizing renewable energy, and whether you want to call renewable energy renewable or not, it is sucking up all that excess of power, and it's going to the cheapest place, allowing this place to be able to build out. And that's just one angle. What are you most excited about in regards to Bitcoin, aside from the self-sovereignty? And I guess the number goes up, and the self-sovereignty is what sort of brings people in. But what else is it about Bitcoin?
I would say what actually makes me most excited about Bitcoin is that I think it brings us back to our authentic selves in the long run. I actually look at it more spiritually. And one of the things that I find interesting is, given that we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and I'm not downplaying his phenomenal foresight and his understanding of cryptography, but I always wonder if it's almost, I'm not religious, but it's almost as if it's like a divine gift to freaking the humanity, because we needed a way to be able to interact peer-to-peer. We needed a way to be able to interact on a decentralized manner. And even for my book, and this may sound a little corny, but I wrote 90% of it in the hours of like 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., where I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh man, this has got to be this chapter, and this has got to be this chapter. And sometimes I feel like when you're in tune, you can sometimes tap into that collective unconscious, that collective knowledge. And I feel like I've met so many phenomenal Bitcoiners that have been able to gain a lot of insight that feels like it's not theirs. So I almost don't attribute even my book to myself. But as for the question, I think that what I'm so excited about is given that Bitcoin cannot be corrupted, or it is very hard to be corrupted, and given the fact that you've got fixed supply, so over time as technology advances, productivity increases, our purchasing power should increase. Ultimately, I think it gives us more capacity as time goes on to actually look inwards and to be able to deepen our relationship with ourselves and introspect, while also more capacity to look outwards and give back to society and contribute to society. So I think on a humanitarian level, I think Bitcoin is just profound.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting you say between 1 and 5, I guess, going to a spiritual place that is the time when we are connected with the divine. Ladies and gentlemen, this may go a little bit sidetracked just for a moment. We are still waiting on for 100% approval yet. We need it from the SEC. We need it from James. They're saying most likely, and it sure looks like it. But doing it at that time, even Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest minds of all human experience, said he'd go to bed with pen and paper next to him, and he'd wake up and there'd be a new invention next to him and happen in those really early hours as well. And I know I've waken up randomly at that time and I just need to go out and write something down. And I think it's when we can let go of our everyday thoughts and then go into that subconscious or the superconscious we can tap in. And reading that book, I guess that's probably why it resonates so well with me as well, because it's reaching you on such a deeper level. It's not just about number go up, but it is sort of that spiritual side. And same with you, this is a little bit sidetracked, but I believe in God as God, the great outdoors, just the universe. Everything is everything. Everything is energy. And then Bitcoin to be an energy network. We live in an energy age. It's all of this just come together. So whoever or whatever Satoshi Nakamoto was, I resonate with that. And I know it's a little bit out there. Eclectic's not the esoteric, maybe. But I think the more people go down that Bitcoin rabbit hole, the more they dive into the esoterics and then fiat food and what else is going on as well. And then I think you see that there is this fiat war is a war on consciousness more so. Yeah, that's what I see anyway, and maybe that's been a little bit paranoid, and whether it's intentional or not, but when they're taking away all our purchasing power and they take away our freedom, our life force, our energy, if we can't store our life force, our energy in something, then it just keeps us sort of running on that hamster wheel as well. So yeah, that aside, I know that's a little bit sidelined, spiritual-wise, ladies and gentlemen, but that's at least the journey that I've been on through Bitcoin, more in touch with myself, which is pretty interesting. In regards to the background, it's bitfeed.live. For everyone, I did post it on Twitter the other day as well. The SEC is reporting Gary is going to dance Gangnam Style to a press conference soon. There's a couple of interesting comments there as well. If you've got any questions, just drop a Q in front of it. But Seb, I want to hand the mic over to you. I want to know a couple of things. What other books, I recommend everyone read your book, but what other books have there been in your life that have led you to where you are, that have had a profound impact, Bitcoin or not?
Oh man, that is so I would say, actually, so I'll turn the question around a little bit and I'll rephrase it. One thing that I've always struggled with is I've always struggled with learning. I've always struggled with being able to actually digest information. And it wasn't until I would say about 6-7 years ago that I actually realized that, one, I don't have to physically read books. I can listen to books. And that, to me, I'm able to consume information far more effectively. But two, many times when we just able to structure and store information and remember specific points. What our brain is phenomenal at doing is being able to pick up random points between abstract ideas and connect the dots. And so one thing that has helped me immensely throughout my life, or not throughout my life, throughout the last 6-7 years, is I've started taking a lot of notes on books. But the way I take notes is not just chapter 1 talks about this, chapter 2 talks about this. I take a note when it resonates with me. And when it resonates with me, I then go over at the end of once I finish the book, I then go over all of the notes that have resonated with me, and I bold the ones that stand out a lot. And then after I go through the ones that stand out a lot, I then go and expand on the ones that, out of those ones that stand out a lot, that really hit me hard in my own words. And so I have this on over 400 books in my collection. And so this has helped me when I wrote my book. If you actually look at the back, I think there's about 500 citations in the book. And so it's helped me immensely. So there's countless books I'd recommend, but I would recommend like being able to start taking notes on books helps you to store content and piece together random points of information.
That's actually pretty interesting, the way that you've laid that out. Repetition is the mother of all learning, and to be able to write it down, to be able to go back over and then disseminate it into your own thoughts, you really are ingraining those lessons in your own language, I guess, but you're continually exposing yourself to it. You've read it, you've wrote it down, you've gone back, you've highlighted it, and then you've put it into your own words. That's something that I'll start doing, I guess most of the time, like I was saying, I read on Kindle at night time. And I find it harder to be able to write notes. But when I go through a book, I put in a lot of bookmark tabs, those little peel tabs, go through, read the book once, go back, and then I read over that page of what I've highlighted and store it in a note in my phone, but definitely pen and paper is probably the best. Just because we are on ETF Watch here, ladies and gentlemen, this is the latest. It's about a minute old. All we need now are the approved effective S1s, and these things can indeed begin trading tomorrow. That said, what we've already seen is the official 19B4 approval order. So we're getting closer and closer. Everyone just needs to hold their horse a little bit. We are still on ETF Watch. The price is not doing all too much. Let me just bring up the block clock as well. I think on 100% approval, we're going to see the price move either way a whole lot more. So 45,630 sats per USD, 2,192. We are at block height 825,191. Jan 11 here in Australia, obviously Jan 10th for most people. Pretty interesting choosing Jan 10th. So that was 15 years after the first block was mined. Do you reckon this is intentional, or is this just how Bitcoin works so perfectly? Like everything about Bitcoin just works so perfectly.
Oh man, I tend to actually, going back to that spiritual point very briefly, I think the world is always giving us what we need to grow. And I think that nothing is complete coincidence. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think that the SEC intended this, but I think the world maps this stuff out in order to kind of raise awareness to certain things.
Yeah. I think as well, being on the spiritual plane, the saying everything is everything, if you think about it, actually becomes pretty confounded. But everything literally is just energy. And if we are following truth, if we're following light, and we're being enlightened in line with light, we're resonating or we're vibrating at a higher resonance, then things will do this. Like I pay a lot of attention, or every time I check my phone, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 1, or 10, 10, or yesterday was like 10 past 10 on the 10th, you know, and it just seems like every time I check my phone, I'm not looking for it. It just happens to be there. And it's just these little signs where the universe has been like, all right, like you're doing the right thing, move on, let's go, continue on. Or is that me just trying to look for the universe and like look for the rhyme from the universe? What are your thoughts about that?
You know what? I think that it would be a very bland world if we try to explain away everything. And of course, you can say, well, there's mathematically we could prove that this is a probability of something like that happening. But I think that the world is always trying to give us what we need to grow. And like, even to give you an example, I remember I was going through a really tough time in a relationship a little while back. And I was deciding I was staying in the relationship because cognitively I really cared about this person. But on an emotional level, I recognized that this relationship just didn't feel right. And I was down in Vancouver and I'm walking along the street. And my friend was like, oh, I need to pop into the store. So I was like, oh, stay out front. And I went down to tie my shoelace. And out the corner of my eye, I see a book on a garbage can just flap open. I was like, huh. I look over onto the garbage can, walk over to the book. And it's open, this book called what's it called? It's like the Shaman's Guide to Developing Your Inner Knowing. Super random. And it flaps open to my birthday. And in it says your lesson of your life is to listen to your inner knowing. And I was asking this question all day, like, should I end this relationship and listen to my inner knowing, or should I cognitively power through? So I think that kind of stuff is just too coincidental. And I tend to lean more on the spiritual side of things.
Yeah, I do too. I think as you follow truth, more and more of these coincidences, like there's a saying, there are no coincidences. And I think if you're asleep, you see these things. Or I guess for Bitcoiners, the biggest thing is people over the next 6, 12, 18 months are going to be like, oh, you got so lucky with Bitcoin. You know, it's just a coincidence, but you're prepared, you're planned, you put in the proof of work, and you will be rewarded for it. Whether you sell or not, it doesn't matter. It's the conviction of the number go up, or the number go up, I guess, proves your own conviction in that you have done the right thing. So obviously not financial advice, but when we can align more and more and more, and then I have these questions like, all right, like I feel like this is total truth. And then I'm like, is this really being made by the CIA? And it's actually a total psyop, you know, like you put 100% of your net worth into this amazing energy money that lives on the internet out there in the ether. And they're like, is this just a psyop to be able to take me back to step one? Like, I have these funny questions because it just feels so good, too good to be true, you know? And I know when you put in hundreds and thousands of hours, it very much doesn't look like it is. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, is there any possibility that this is all just a total psyop? We've been hoodwinked, and they're there just having the last laugh. And even what the SEC's doing with their website and stuff, they're like, we're just going to play these Bitcoiners.
It's you know what? It's a tough one because I think that our society today is cracking us and slowly breaking us down to the point at which we start kind of like giving in. We don't believe in any of this esoteric stuff. And ultimately, if we don't believe in this higher power, if we don't believe in a lot of these more spiritual beliefs, then who do we look to? We start looking to the state. And so I think that if you look back throughout history, many times if the state wants to gain control, you start breaking down these things. You start breaking down gender roles. You start breaking down beliefs, you name it. And so I think that in the end, a lot of these feelings that are coming up, having ourselves questioning our own beliefs, is actually just society rubbing off on us. And I think it's really important to listen to inner knowing, listen to what it is that we're feeling on an energetic level, because many times I think that our subconscious is far more aware of what is going on than our cognitive mind is.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I just want to interrupt as well. There's a couple of big things going on for everyone. So let me just bring this one up here, share this tab instead. So Grayscale Investment receives SEC approval to uplist GBTC. Let me share this. This is if we jump over into it. Grayscale Investments receive SEC approval to uplist the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust in New York Stock Exchange ARCA as spot Bitcoin ETF. So this is official here. Will become the world's second largest commodity-based ETF and the world's largest spot Bitcoin ETF. That is one of those asterisks as well. So there is going to be a caveat to that probably later down the track. Grayscale, the world's largest asset manager, today announced that the US SEC has approved the New York Stock Exchange ARCA application pursuant to Rule 19B4 under the SEC Act of 1934 to list the shares of its flagship product, and is expected to declare GBTC's registration statement and Form S3 effective as of 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. What is the time, Eastern Standard Time, your end?
It's 1:30 right now, and they're 3 hours ahead. So what is that, 4:30?
Yeah, all right. So definitely moments away from it. Expected to commence trade on January 11th, so as soon as tomorrow. Once GBTC start trading the New York ARCA, GBTC shares will cease trade in OTC markets, will have automatically been uplisted as shares of a spot Bitcoin ETF. Current GBTC shareholders do not have to take any action prior to this. Trust launched in 2013. We can go over that. I can repost that there at Sean Clark 911. It looks like it's official. Seb, there's a couple of other things. I'm just looking for this press release from Gary Gensler.
I should also say quickly around the GBTC.
Yeah,
a lot of I'm not sure if people have actually dug in. So you start looking at the fee structure for whether it's GBTC or a lot of the other ETFs, and GBTC comes in at, I think, 1.5%.
Yeah, so they dropped it from 2 to 1.5. Crazy.
It's insane. But then all of the others come in around like 0.2 to like 0.4. So I think GBTC is going to slowly lose its position as people flood into the other ETFs.
Yeah, I was asking yesterday when I had Fred Kruger on, who'd been on Wall Street for many, many years, about that, and he said maybe their strategy is at 1.5%. They're earning like $500 million in fees, $450 million in fees per year at a 1.5% rate. And so I think what it sort of sounded like, and people can go back through and watch that interview that we had yesterday, that conversation. But what it's sounding like is they'll just get as much fees as they possibly can. If Bitcoin doubles, they're getting $1 billion a year for doing nothing, basically. And then maybe someone like the likes of BlackRock is going to buy that Bitcoin out from under them. But yeah, super interesting, hey, like everyone else, Bitwise as well. Just really quickly, everyone, Matt Hogan was going to come on tomorrow. Obviously, the ETF has been approved. The guy's got a huge schedule, so we're rescheduling for next week. We'll get him on there, so make sure you hit subscribe for that and push the like button. But that's the Bitwise CEO. Price prediction, next 24 hours. I don't give out price predictions. I don't know about you, Seb. No. What about long term? Do you like? I think Bitcoin's either going to 0 or 1 million long term, and I'm not putting any time frame on it. I feel like that's irresponsible. But do you have any thoughts long term or any speculation? Or obviously, any price prediction is speculation. Like it's but do you think about the price or?
Like, of course, price. Anyone who's in Bitcoin would be lying if they said that as price goes up, it doesn't benefit them. And I think that, so I'm not going to deny that. I think that when I think about price, the way I see it is that if we know that technology is always constantly trying to drive down prices. So given Bitcoin's fixed supply, let's just say hypothetically Bitcoin became a world reserve asset. Well, we know that technology is driving down prices at around 5 to 15% per year. So let's just take 10% to kind of a higher end of the mid-range of that. Well, if you look at, say, real estate, bonds, and equities, well, real estate annualizes over the last 100 years around 6 to 7%, I believe, or 7%, 8% over the last 100 years. If we look at equities annualizes around kind of like 8 to 9% over the last 100 years, and bonds around 5 to 6%. Well, if technology is driving down prices and you have an asset like Bitcoin, which is allowing that purchasing power to increase by 10% per year as technology is driving down prices, all of a sudden you're outperforming equity market or your equity, real estate, bond market. We're talking about the real estate market is $300 trillion in assets. The equity market is like $150 trillion. The bond market, another $300 trillion. Like we're talking about astronomical amounts of money. And a lot of that is only in those assets because money no longer acts as a store of value. And so if all of a sudden currency, Bitcoin, serves as a store of value, capital is going to flood out of these traditional assets and back into Bitcoin. And you can do the math yourself, but if you just think Bitcoin isn't even worth $1 trillion and there is almost $1 quadrillion worth of capital locked up in traditional assets purely to escape inflation that could potentially move back into Bitcoin. And so I don't have a number, but I think it's a hell of a lot higher than what we are right now.
Yeah. I did see a thumbnail. I think it had your face and $18 million on there, but it's just because Bitcoin is so finite, they're going to continue printing money, and we don't know how much money they're going to have to continue to print to be able to service the debt. And then every other asset, like you're saying, it is, I agree, going to be a whole lot higher there. It does look like Gensler's put out a statement here. The only thing in regards to it is the photo's a little bit blurry. You'd think they would have done a little bit better here, if anyone can confirm this quickly. But today the Commission approved the listing and trade of a number of spot Bitcoin exchange traded products, ETP shares. I've often said that the Commission acts within the law and how the courts interpret the law. He's super salty here, ladies and gentlemen. Beginning under Chair Jay Clayton in 2018 through March 23, the Commission disapproved more than 20 ETFs for spot Bitcoin ETPs or exchange rule filings for spot Bitcoin ETPs. One of those filings made by Grayscale contemplated the conversion of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust in an ETP. We are now faced with a new set of filings similar to those we have disapproved in the past. However, have changed the US Court of Appeals. Columbia held that the Commission failed to adequately explain its reasoning in disapproving the listing and trading. The court therefore vacated the Grayscale order and remanded the matter to the Commission based on these circumstances. Those discussed more fully if in the approval order. I feel the most sustainable path forward is to approve the listing and the trading of these. Though we're merit neutral, I note that the underlying asset in the metals ETPs have consumer and industrial uses, while in contrast, Bitcoin is primarily a speculative, volatile asset that's also used for illicit activity, including ransomware, money laundering, sanction evasion, and terrorist financing. Obviously, Jamie Dimon and Gary Gensler, I wonder who put whose words in each other's mouths. It's absolutely insane. While we approved the listings and the trade in a certain spot Bitcoin ETP shares today, we did not approve or endorse Bitcoin. Investors should remain cautious about the myriad risks associated with Bitcoin and products whose value is tied to crypto. Pretty incredible. I will confirm that is 100% factual. What do you think about this programming, this propaganda, the misinformation that they're putting out on launch day?
It looks like some kid who his parents have just told him he's got to share his cookie, and he's just upset about it. It's just, I cannot believe just I would say the dishonesty and just the lack of integrity. And we know absolute by fact, like even the ex-director of the CIA did a look into illicit activity on Bitcoin, and it found out it was something like 0.4% of transactions are used for illicit activity in comparison to something like 4% with the US dollar. So the US dollar is the ultimate form of money laundering and illicit activity and terrorist financing. And so I think that in the end, this is just them realizing that they're being confronted, and they're trying not to back down.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It just seems so insidious, really. Like, could they not just say, okay, here it is. We made the wrong choice. We understand now that there is value to Bitcoin. It's been performing well. People that got on a Bitcoin stand anytime over the last 1, 3, 5, 10, 15 years have done amazing. But I just want to confirm, ladies and gentlemen, that was actually an approval. 100% Bitcoin is now an ETF. This is the SEC website. So we can confirm for a fact. Just everything about this is so poor. Like, well done on approving it, Gary Gensler, paid to delay. But the photo is so pixelated. This is an official statement by the SEC on their website. It's I don't know. It's just been such a botch job the whole time with everything.
They fumbled the ball at every single step of the way, and it looks like the picture's taken on a freaking potato. So we'll see.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, 100%. It has been confirmed. It's been such a pleasure. I want to hand it over to you. What are some of the takeaways that people can get? Obviously, the link for your book is below. It's a fascinating read. I wish I got through more of it. And chapter 5 in, I think it'll be a good book for my wife as well to be able to read. So is Beers for Bitcoin, all the Bitcoin books that many times on the channel, ladies and gentlemen, read the books, read the bugs, all the Bitcoin books. You need to get them out there and get them to your hands, get them into the hands of friends and families. But I'm going to hand the stage over to you, Seb, and then I'll come back on.
For sure.
But
so, what you got?
Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think when I wrote this book, as I mentioned at the start, I was really trying to highlight how money weaves its influence throughout society, and how so many of the issues that we face, whether it is environmental destruction, whether it's a breakdown in the parent-child bond, whether it is broken politicians, broken business practices, all of these things stem from a broken monetary system, and what options we have available. And ultimately, I'm sure you can guess from this podcast, Good Day Bitcoin, that I believe Bitcoin is the solution to a lot of these issues, but I've really tried to make this book as easily digestible as possible. And so I don't talk about Bitcoin until the second to last chapter, and then I only briefly mention it. And so it works really well as an orange pill book because it helps someone understand the problems before presenting the solution. And so far, the feedback, to be 100% honest, I've just been absolutely in awe by the feedback, because we ended up hitting #1 bestseller on Amazon globally and in all of its categories. And so it's just been a really cool journey. And I hope that I'm able to support more and more people along their understanding of Bitcoin, because it's a phenomenal product.
Even just up to chapter 5, it's been an absolutely amazing read. And it's so easy to read as well. Like, you just break it down so simply, but it's a great journey. And I've read not every single Bitcoin book, but I've read a lot of Bitcoin books. And when a new one comes out, you're like, oh, just another Bitcoin book, but the way that you approach it, it's so different to every other Bitcoin book. So you've done such a great job, and well done on getting to #1 on Amazon globally. That's absolutely huge. That's proof of work, that's that reassurance that time, energy, commitment has paid off.
Oh, man.
So
I feel as if, I was just going to say, I feel as if on a subconscious level, people understand when something's wrong, and when the right thing comes about, they resonate with it. And it's kind of like last year we saw that song, which your documentary, you kind of talk about in your documentary, The Richmond North of Redmond. And I think many people, maybe not on a cognitive level, are listening to the lyrics and resonating, but on a subconscious level, they know what is going on and they can feel that something is wrong. And I think that's why that song blew up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. If you haven't checked out that documentary, it's called Broken Money, I think, on my Twitter. I've changed I'll bring it. But yeah, Richmond, north of Richmond, when people resonated just so hard with it. And even my wife, some of the messaging in there, she's never really been... It wouldn't have sort of been the song that would have resonated with her, but she just learned it. And then when we were in Virginia and we were in Richmond and stuff, she learned to play that song and, Shenandoah River and stuff. So we're sitting on the Shenandoah River and she's playing Country Roads Take Me Home, and then Richmond, north of Richmond. There is just, it's beautiful. But that just resonated with so many people. I'll bring it up for everyone here. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth the video, The Untold History of Money, 100 Years. Let me share this tab instead in your book, because I haven't gotten there yet. So it's the one with Jerome Powell here, The Untold History. It's well worth the view. 100 years. It takes you through the banking system, 100 years of lies, and then how Bitcoin fixes this. When you get to the point where Bitcoin does fix this, do you... then tell people how they can go about acquiring it, or what their next step is? Because you said you just briefly touch on it. So then how are they meant to know what to do next?
It's a really challenging one because you don't want to push something to make it seem as though you're being salesy. And so the way that I've kind of broken it down is, first, we go through obviously all of the problems of our current system and what this may look like if we continue on this trajectory. And then we dive into what would a monetary system look like that could realign the incentives in society towards collaboration and more productive endeavors. And I basically backwards engineer Bitcoin and say, well, we would need a decentralized system so that no one entity can control it. We would need a fixed monetary supply so we can capitalize off the advancements in technology and productivity. It would need to be peer-to-peer so that we don't have to rely on trust. And ultimately, I break down Bitcoin without labeling it as Bitcoin, because I think it's really important for people to not have that preconceived idea of Bitcoin step in and block them from understanding what's happening. And then I dive into, well, what are our available options? I dive into gold and I discuss some of the issues that we've already discussed, whereby we don't know how much gold there is. It's physical in nature. Yeah. It's got to be custodied centrally usually. I dive into central bank digital currencies and why they're not the answer. And then I dive into Bitcoin. And so ultimately, I haven't pushed it to the point where I tell them how to go ahead and buy it. But at the very end of the book, I do mention, if you want to read more about this, you can go onto Looking Glass so that people can then go on and they can learn specifically about Bitcoin. They can learn about how to take custody and things like that. So it's more just to plant that seed, because I think planting that seed is really important. If you try and force that seed to grow, sometimes it can then push that person a little too far.
Yep, no, I absolutely agree. Well, I look forward to getting to the end of it, hopefully over the next couple of days. I do manage to, but it's been absolutely amazing. Seb, it's been a huge pleasure. I've put your Twitter below, Looking Glass I'll add as well. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
For sure. So I'd just say there's three ways. You can either jump on Twitter, sebbunny.com, and it's below. You can either jump on my own personal website, and I kind of write about many of the topics that I talk about in the book. I write about spirituality. I write about, you name it. I talk a lot about self-sovereignty and how kind of the world, kind of what we can do to be more self-sovereign individuals. And then lastly, just Looking Glass education. And so those three places, I'm more than happy to share with you guys. And if you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to reach out. And then I should also say, you're talking about your documentary, and anyone who is out there who hasn't watched it yet, they have to watch it. It is such a phenomenal watch, and you did such a good job.
No, I appreciate that. Just on your website, is that sebbunny.com? I'll put the link. Yeah, cool. I'll put that link below for everyone. It's been such a pleasure, man. We're going to have to get you back once I finish reading the book. Sorry, I didn't 100% complete the proof of work there. It's been a crazy time of year. Anyway, I will get there probably over the next couple of days, and then we'll get you back on. But well done on getting to #1 Amazon globally. And what an exciting time. I appreciate you being here, as the SEC has confirmed. So everyone watching, smash like, hit subscribe if we vibe. We'll see you on the next video. Be blessed.
Thanks, guys.